Hey everybody, it's Albert. Those of you who've been watching my channel for a while may remember some exchanges I've had in the past with a fellow who goes by the name Edwardpf123. He's a King James onlyist. He was a pretty staunch defender of Gail Ripplinger, and you know, we had some back and forth things, and I think those videos are certainly still out there, but I really haven't dealt with him at all. I didn't really care to. For me, the King James onlyist thing was pretty much, it had this like brief period where it was kind of a big thing on YouTube, but then there are a number of people, not just myself but others, who I thought pretty much cleared the air on that one, and now it's just kind of left to whoever was into it, and you know, which is fun. They can go ahead and do their little weird thing, but I think anyone who wants to know the issues, I think the information at least is out there, and it's been disseminated widely enough that I didn't really have anything else to say. Certainly they haven't come up with any new arguments, so there's nothing really to answer. So I really kind of hadn't been addressing it at all. I thought at one point I might put stuff together in terms of a pamphlet or book or something, but I haven't really gotten around to it. I've been busy with other stuff. Now, so it came to my surprise that Edward had a response video to something I had done some time ago, and he put that out this morning, and I said, oh, well, let me just see what he's got to say. I haven't really dealt with him in a while, so I went to his channel and find out that there's actually another video besides the one, and I may respond to the other one later, but this other video drew my attention because it had my name on it, or at least my username. It said, Labyrinth312's purpose in attacking the King James Bible. That's the title of it. Now, which is kind of odd, because the fact is I've never attacked the King James Bible. I've attacked the King James onlyism, but I haven't attacked the King James Bible. In fact, I have a great love for the King James Bible. After all, remember, the King James Bible was a Bible produced by my church, not Edward's. It wasn't made by fundamentalists. It wasn't made by Baptists. It was made by Anglicans. It is an Anglican translation from the 17th century. So I have no problem with the King James Bible. And part of the reason I felt so strongly against King James onlyism was I didn't like to see that particular Bible being associated with the people who run around, you know, coming up with the conspiracy theories one finds associated with King James onlyism. So that was actually one of the motivations among the general confusion. So, but I decided, since he's, you know, and I wasn't planning on this, but since he's made this accusation against me, I just figured, well, let's have some fun with this. Now, those of you who, the last time I did anything on Edward, he had made a video which basically, those of you who remember back when this shows you how long ago this was, that when YouTube used to have groups, and I had a group called Contra KJV Onlyism I started, and it was done almost on a whim kind of thing, where we just put and basically the idea was to put all the videos that debunked King James onlyism in one place, so if someone were interested, they could go find it. And so I let anyone basically join who wanted to, and the whole thing was, it was to debunk King James onlyism, not to attack the King James Bible, and that was made very clear in the basically platform of the group. And Edward said basically that I was leading this conspiracy under some sign of the Antichrist, and it was very strange. And I'll put a link to the 2 videos where I responded to Edward. It was called, "Hey, I got my own conspiracy theory," parts 1 and 2, and they'll be down there. And since they include Edward's video, they're pretty self-explanatory. So the excerpts from Edward's video. So, but let's now get to this new video he's made. So apparently he's got something else to say. So and the fun thing is, I'm going to be watching this for the first time as you're watching it. So this should be fun.
Good morning. if you followed Labium's 312's ministry, you notice that on YouTube that the major thrust of it is to attack the King James Bible.
Edward, here we are less than 10 seconds into your video and you're a demonstrable liar. Major thrust of my ministry has been to attack the King James Bible. First of all, as I pointed out, it's never been to attack the King James Bible, but King James onlyism, there is a huge difference there. More importantly, though, Edward, I had to go back and check to find the last time I made a video about King James onlyism. You know what it was, Edward? February 19th, 2011, almost a year ago, Edward. I have not made a video on King James onlyism in almost a year, Edward. Since then, I've only had 2 videos that even brushed against the subject. One had to do with Acts 12:4, but in that one, although I pointed out that the interpretation by King James onlyists is far-fetched, the way they often interpret that, that actually the King James translation for the time it was written was fine. That Easter was a legitimate thing to put in there, but not for the reasons King James onlyists think. So I was certainly not attacking the King James Bible. The other one had to do with a particular individual, and I think you know what I'm talking about, and that had nothing to do with even King James onlyism in general or any other King James onlyist, just a particular individual, and I really wasn't picking that fight either. Certainly, I had no intention of making anything on King James onlyism anymore, but you guys just keep looking for me. I think what it is just the fact that these videos are still out there, because I've left them out there, and people see them. And every once in a while, I get a PM from someone thanking me because they were confused and they saw this stuff and what I said, and they said, "Oh, now it's much clearer. I understand. Thank you." Blah blah blah, and that's great. It's good. That's fine. I know that isn't fine for you, but it's fine for me, and I don't have any problem with that. But obviously, you seem to think that you've got to keep revisiting this battle. So apparently you're just not getting your points across. So you think somehow to drag me back into the fray or something. But here we are, 10 seconds, and you've already. Basically, you lied. I mean, because it isn't a major. I haven't said anything about it in a year. What I've said was for a brief period of time. I made a bunch of King James videos, and they're out there, and that's it. But I haven't said a word about it since. So, how do you explain that, Edward? Inquiring minds want to know.
And to cause people to doubt it. And this whole issue of King James, I was sure that there was in it. And I put up a video one time showing what the Labium stood for, was the Catholic Church.
Edward. At this point, I would, if anyone wants to know what the Labyrinth stood for, it's actually, I'll go over it briefly, but it's in that video that I mentioned about having my own conspiracy theory, because I didn't explain it to them. The Labyrinth, by the way, is the Chi-Rho symbol. It looks like a P and an X. It's actually it's the letters Chi and Rho in the Greek language, which are the first 2 letters of Christus. It was a symbol that was fairly common in the Roman world. It was actually even used in Roman bookkeeping as kind of like an equivalent to an asterisk, like pointing something out, like important. And Christians adopted it as a sort of it's kind of like a secret code because they were under persecution. And then Constantine, of course, used it as the banner to march under in the Battle of Pons Milvius. I guess that's what upset. But the Catholic Church used it. So did the Orthodox Church. So did a lot of churches. In fact, a lot of Protestant churches used it. So there's nothing. It's 2 letters. It's the first 2 letters of Christ in Greek. That's all it is. Sorry to disappoint you. Now he seems to think it's the symbol of the Antichrist. At least that's what he said in his video that was about more than a year ago. But that's kind of delusional, I think. And I think it's kind of sort of indicative of the sort of mindset he's in. But let's just keep going, shall we?
And in one of his own articles, he talks about the collapse of the rise of postmodernism and how its effect on the churches. and what one of the results have to be, one of the answers to that collapse has to be. He says here, third approach. I have to talk about two approaches and responses, and I'll link it to his article. Third approach is again to return anew to the riches of Catholicity passed down throughout the Church's 2 millennia of history. The three traditions must believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic past. Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Anglicanism have all waged their own battles for modernity and emerged from them in various stages of health. But all three have vast riches in their traditions from which to draw upon, even if they are currently facing trials. Many evangelicals are realizing this in reading the Church Fathers, medieval theologians, and reformers, and are now becoming exposed to pre-modern approaches in theology and exegesis. The study of patristics, once non-existent among evangelicals, is now a burgeoning movement. Writers such as Thomas Oden, Timothy George, and D.H. Williams are opening up a wealth of riches to those whose theological vistas really extended back more than a few generations. The long-term viability of this movement is hard to gauge. Like early attempts at recovering Catholicity, it will undoubtedly lead to conversions into other churches and come under suspicion, but it will also enrich theology of those remaining with a greater view of the church in history that otherwise would have gone unnoticed. Whatever the result of view known as post-modernity is only a pit stop on the road from modernity to madness. If the church is to affect the culture rather than to be affected by it, she must first recover the Catholicity that is in her essence. We cannot find truth without first acknowledging He who is the source of all truth. Christians' foundations lie not in the world but in eternity. The world balks at the denying their intellectual independence, but we cannot change the world by agreeing with it. We are not called to show the world its own reflection, but a reflection of its Savior.
You know, as I was listening to that, and the concept of Catholicity, which I'll get into in a little bit, is very important in this article. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you probably are missing the point of the article. And the fact that keeps pronouncing the word Catholicity gave me some indication he probably didn't know what I was talking about. Now, at that point, the first time I said, he just made a slip there, but he kept pronouncing it the same. And that sort of indicated to me that he's not real familiar with the word in the context of church history and theology and whatever. So I'm and as we get a little further, I sort of had to come back to this just to make this point, because as we'll see in the next segment here, he doesn't have any idea what I'm talking about, and then I'll have to sort of correct him and explain what I was talking about. So let's just stop here for the moment.
And of course, the point is, Philippians 3:12 is that that is done not through the scriptures, but through the church, the various traditions of the church, whether it be Roman Catholic Church, Anglican Church, which he says he's having problems with, and on an earlier article that he's written, and all the Greek Orthodox churches, and that's because they adhere to the sacraments and believe in that.
It's amazing how you can just completely miss a point. So let me explain to you what the article is actually about. It's pretty much the effects of modernity and post-modernity within the church, and basically I had made the point that that modernity and its striving for the sure foundation for all knowledge, which to place everything on this firm foundation for all knowledge, and essentially, once it basically critiqued everything, it ended up critiquing that post-modernity essentially is modernity gone cancerous, that it's eating upon itself, that it found that its own foundations and turned on its own foundations and found that in fact they didn't meet its standards, and hence with post-modernity you're left with nothing but the doubt. And my thing was that the whole thrust of the article is that this is not a way to any sort of knowledge. Now, I pointed out that there were approaches, things that the church could do and I said there are 3 paths available to Christians where in terms of whether churches have succumbed to modernity. The first is just to ignore the cultural shift and basically become irrelevant. The second is to continue chasing after the culture and deny the truth. But the third approach was to return to the essentials of the faith, and that's what Catholicity is. It's the essentials of the historic Christian faith that's been passed down in the 2 millennia of its history. And I pointed out that there are 3 traditions that are basically most rooted in that early church that follow this. They've maintained some degree of that, the early church's ideas. And this doesn't mean they're correct in any way. It's not saying that these 3 are free from error. They're certainly not. Trust me. At least but there are 3 traditions that maintain at least some of the forms of that. And if you look in their history, you find you can go back to that early church, and those are in Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Anglicanism. That doesn't mean that in their current form they're that, but they're the ones who have a history to go back to, rather than something created last week. That basically the people who are that a lot of what you have in a lot of modern churches is the Bible interpreted according to the standards of the day, and that's in fact what's happened. Now, I also pointed out that a lot of evangelicals have come to realize this and have started reading things like the Church Fathers, but he sort of blurs over the fact that among the theologians mentioned were not just the Church Fathers and the medieval theologians, but also the Reformers. So it's not as though I was shunning Protestantism to the side at all, but that sort of got lost in the shuffle somewhere. And I'll let you read the article, but basically the idea was that I was asking, could, in fact, historic Christianity be maintained in the setting of evangelicalism as it's being, as I can see happening with a lot of evangelicals becoming very much interested in church history. And the question was, is this going to be a viable thing or isn't it? And I honestly don't know. And that's why I was just putting it out there. But this idea that somehow I was saying everybody has to go join one of those 3 churches or something like that is just not the case. That's not what I said at all. But see, Edward's got it in his mind Catholic equals Pope. Never mind that the creeds of those who defended things like the divinity of Christ, etc., these people referred to themselves as Catholic. But it's kind of, this sort of thing is kind of lost on him. As for the scriptures, he says, without this, I never said anything about tossing aside this. Remember, I'm an Anglican, and I would suggest you read the 39 articles. Certainly sola scriptura is defended there. So let's, obviously you don't really understand this at all, Edward. I'm sorry, you just don't understand it. You don't know what I'm talking about. You have no clue what I'm talking about. Look, frankly, I think in this sort of subject, when you're dealing with church history, I think you're in maybe a little bit over your head. So, no offense, but that's just obviously the case.
So if you're evangelical and you believe in the Scripture alone, here's a guy attacking your King James Bible, telling you it has errors in it. Let me also say about the King James only movement. King James only movement doesn't believe that the translators will move the way the original writers of Scripture were. What we believe is that they were filled with the Holy Spirit. They translated the perfect translation without errors.
I had to double take on that one. It's like, did he just say that? Now, for all the people who are constantly saying, well, I misrepresent King James onlyism as these sort of people that are saying that there was some sort of second inspiration, well, there you have it. He just said it. He's equating the original autograph, the writing of the original autographs, and the translation of the King James Bible, that this was another act of inspiration. Apparently, no one in between counted. Because let's face it, none of the Bibles we had in between were ever equivalent to the King. They didn't have the same thing as the King James Bible. So God waited for 17th century white Englishman to make his Bible perfect again, according to Edward. That's what it's about. Now, remember that's the thing you don't get, see, because they say, well, God has to preserve His Word perfectly. Well, why didn't He preserve His Word perfectly in the previous centuries if that were if it had to be this exact sort of Xerox copy standard? Why wasn't it done earlier? Don't those people count? Doesn't God care about people in the 10th century? According to Edward, no. See, he had to wait for white Englishmen to make the Bible perfect again. The other folks didn't matter, according to Edward. This is pretty much what you have with King James onlyism. Now, when Edward, and just hear me out on this. I want you to listen to yourself. Honestly, you're making an idol out of this Bible. Frankly, you are making this your idol. This has become an idol for you, and it's kind of disturbing in that sense, because if you were to show up in 1611 in England and preach what you are preaching now on your YouTube channel. I mean, aside from, let's say before the King James Bible, I'm talking about your doctrines, the doctrines that I've seen on your videos, the things you believe. If you were to preach that in England, or the time leading up and after the King James Bible, you would have ended up in the Tower of London. Okay, and some of the people who translated the King James Bible might be recommending your execution, or at least your torture, or something like that, because they didn't believe that, Edward, and they were very serious about what they considered heresy. You see, the people who translated the King James Bible, now, by the way, I'm not advocating this. I'm not saying this was a good thing. It wasn't. But the people who translated the King James Bible, the vast majority of them were Anglicans who believed in things like sacraments, and believed in and used the liturgy and followed the church calendar and all those things that you probably don't like, and they had bishops and all that stuff. Anglicanism. I mean, that's what it's about, and that's it. It's they considered themselves to be Reformed Catholics, as they put it. That's what the whole idea of their church was, to basically peel away what they considered the accretions of medieval Catholicism and return to what they considered a Reformed Catholicism. Now, I'm not saying they were right or wrong or how successful they were, but that was the basic idea, to try to get back to the early church, the early centuries of the church. They didn't have any problem with people like Jerome. In fact, in the preface of the King James Bible, they praised Jerome, very much. I mean, you can read it yourself. I'm sure at some point you must have read it. In fact, in that original 1611 King James Version, there's a calendar in there telling you how to calculate Easter. Chew on that one for a while. Now, the people who weren't Anglicans, who were in the translation committee, there were a few of them who weren't Anglicans. They were Puritans. Now, I know you've pointed this out, and I've seen some of the comments on the video you made, but Edward, I want you to sit down for this one. Do you have any idea what a Puritan was in the 17th century? Do you know what they were? Sit down. They were Calvinists, Edward. Calvinists. The Calvinists, the ones that you're always complaining about? They're probably the only group you dislike almost as much as Catholics. They were Calvinists. So you've got Calvinists and Catholics. I mean, think about this. These are the people who produced the King James Bible. And the manuscripts, they come from basically the Byzantine tradition. Do you know what Byzantine means, Edward? It comes from the word Byzantium. Byzantium was a city, and it later was renamed Constantinople. Historians it basically refers to the Church of the Eastern Roman Empire. Byzantine manuscripts came from the Church of the Eastern Roman Empire. That would have been the church centered at Constantinople in the Eastern Roman Empire. After the fall of the western part of the empire, historians refer to that period as the Byzantine Empire. That's why they call them Byzantine manuscripts. But they called themselves Roman. But that's it. But the important thing is, though, that church that produced those manuscripts that basically the King James Version came out of, it was the Eastern Orthodox Church, Edward. And they took those Eastern Orthodox manuscripts and they were later edited by people who were, well, Roman Catholic. And then eventually these were collated together by a fellow named Desiderius Erasmus, who was a Catholic priest. And then his editions of the Greek texts were eventually, there were new editions that were of the basically very similar, pretty much in the same mold, by fellows named Stephanus and Beza, Theodore Beza. They were followers of John Calvin. I'm not just talking Calvinists. They were followers of Calvin himself. Stephanus was the publisher of Calvin's Institutes, and Theodore Beza was actually Calvin's successor at the Geneva Theocracy. So we're talking close associates of John Calvin. And then finally, they were collated. These manuscripts were these Greek critical editions were translated rather by a bunch of Catholics and Calvinists. I mean, at least Reformed Catholics and Calvinists. So that's your perfect Bible, Edward. That really is. Okay, that's basically, there you have it. And somehow you want to disconnect yourself from that. And somehow you imagine this was some sort of perfect fundamentalist Bible. No, Edward, you're in a dream world. It wasn't. You can go. In fact, there's a very good book I would recommend for anyone interested in the history of the King James Bible by Nicholson. It's called God's Secretaries. Wonderful book. I would definitely suggest reading it. But if you're a King James onlyist, you may be in for the shock of your life. It's one of those books that came out on the 400th anniversary. It's definitely the best of them, the most scholarly. So, but it will take you back a little. I don't, there you go, Edward. There's your perfect Bible.
Higgins 312 ministry has one goal: to get you out of your Bible and to accept another authority. The authority either of the Anglican Church, the Roman Catholic Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, and that's his role. That's what his ministry on YouTube is.
Edward. I mean, it's sort of sad. Here you are making these accusations, professing the Christian. I'm not doubting your love of Christ at all. But do you think it honors him to lie like that? The main thrust of, you know what I'm talking about. The main thrust of my ministry is to down the King James Bible. I mean, don't you think not talking about it for a year is a kind of funny way of doing that, Edward? I mean, frankly, the last year or so, I've been moved on to a different conspiracy theory, mainly the whole zeitgeist thing. And I realize there's a lot of people think I've talked about that one way too much, and maybe I should get back to King James onlyism. But there really wasn't anything left to say on the subject, Edward. And you've kind of proven that here, that you haven't raised the level, that you're kind of stuck in the same thing, making the same accusations, pretending that people really care. I realize maybe you're trying to relive the glory days when maybe people were paying more attention to you, and I was paying attention to you and interacting with you in those videos. But frankly, after that whole thing about the Cairo symbol, I just realized this is way too silly. And at that point, it was just a matter of if all I can do was kind of this level of interaction, it just really wasn't doing anything that to bring the church together. It was only dividing it further. But that seems to be your goal. Then you go ahead and try. I really don't care anymore, Edward. Honestly, I think King James onlyism is a dead end. I still think it's a dead end. I left the videos up for those who may be sucked into this and want to see the other side. It's there. They can interact with it. If at some point I feel like talking about it again, I will. And I'll probably interact with that other video that you the video response you gave me, if it's worth responding to in a few days. But, you know, if you're going to, you know, accuse me of things, at least be honest. You know, can you at least be honest, Edward? I mean, you know, is it that difficult to just, for once, to just be honest? Now, you know you know very well I haven't been interacting with King James Onlyism for all this time. You had to know this, but you chose to ignore it and somehow make it like this is the main thing I'm concerned with. And it's obviously not. So, here's a question for you, Edward. Why are you lying? Honestly, do you think this serves God to just lie about other people, particularly other Christians? Is this what your ministry is about, to make false accusations? Or, you know, you're always talking about things being taken out of the Bible. Is the whole part about bearing false witness, is that taken out of yours, Edward? Just think about it. For everyone else, thank you very much for your time.